My name is Sierra Callan, and for most of my life I've been the background noise in my own family. That night I sat near the sliding glass door at my sister Mallory's backyard party, nursing a glass of water while the laughter swelled around me, the kind of laughter that stings. A little too loud, too rehearsed. I'd heard it before. I knew exactly how it ended. Mallory was on a roll, telling some childhood story about how I once spilled orange juice on my third-grade teacher and cried like the sky was falling. She embellished, of course. She always did. And the crowd ate it up. My mother laughed the hardest. My father offered a, "That sounds like our Sierra," with a smirk. I didn't say a word. Then, cutting through the noise like a sharp wind through fog, came a small voice, "But she flies the jet." The air shifted. Chairs stopped creaking. Forks froze midair. Mallory blinked down at her 10-year-old son. "What?" Liam turned to her, wide-eyed and unbothered. "Aunt Sierra flies the jet." She showed me. "She wears the headset and everything." Mallory's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I took another sip of water. Didn't nod, didn't confirm, just let the silence stretch long and weighty. Some truths don't need to be shouted, especially when they come from the only person in the room who was actually paying attention. When you grow up with someone like Mallory, you learn to shrink early. She was the kind of child who demanded attention just by breathing. Blonde, loud, impossibly quick, with comebacks that made adults laugh and teachers overlook her cruelty. She always knew how to fill a room, and more importantly, how to empty me out of it. I was quieter, darker-haired, bookish. If Mallory was fireworks, I was static. People noticed her. They forgot me in the same breath. I used to think that was just how families worked. Some kids shine, others decorate the edges. Every school event became her stage. If I made honor roll, she'd win the talent show. If I learned to play piano, she'd choreograph a dance and perform it barefoot on grandma's dining table. And somehow, the family framed it all as natural. "She's just got the spark," my dad would say, ruffling her hair. "Don't be jealous, Sierra," my mom would add when I pulled back a little. "You're different. You're more grounded." Grounded. That word stuck like tar. I stopped trying to be seen after a while. The less I offered, the less they had to compare. And the quieter I got, the more they used my silence as proof that Mallory was the better one. By high school she was prom queen. I was working part-time in the school library, trying to save up for flight lessons no one in the house knew I was taking. I never told them I was applying to aviation schools. I didn't think they'd care. Worse, I thought they might laugh. When I got my acceptance letter, I opened it alone in my car outside the post office. I remember sitting there with it pressed against my chest, smiling like I'd stolen something. In a way, I had a future that wasn't written by Mallory's spotlight, a version of myself untouched by the labels they'd given me. At family dinners, I kept it vague. "Still working at the airport," I'd say, and they'd nod, already looking past me. Mallory would cut in with stories about her new kitchen remodel, her husband's promotion, her influencer collab with some skincare brand. I didn't interrupt. I never did. Being invisible had become familiar, comfortable, even. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that while they were laughing at stories about the little sister who cried over orange juice spills, I was logging flight hours over 5 different countries. I was learning to navigate weather patterns and emergency landings. I was flying jets they couldn't pronounce the names of. And I never once thought of inviting them on board. My first solo flight was in an old Cessna 172 with faded blue stripes and a throttle that stuck slightly when you pushed it too hard, the kind of plane that teaches you humility, precision, patience. I was 19, hands shaking on the yoke, heartbeat loud in my headset. But when the wheels lifted and the earth slid away beneath me, I remember thinking, this is mine. No one else gets to touch this. It's strange how clarity lives at 10,000 feet. I trained in Arizona, far from the cold politeness of home, far from the dinner tables where Mallory's stories always landed louder than mine. The flight school was brutal, competitive. I worked 2 jobs, one in baggage handling at a local airport, another cleaning hangars at night just to afford extra simulator time. I didn't complain. The silence suited me. It gave me room to become someone else. By 26 I had my commercial license. By 30 I was flying Gulfstreams for a private charter company that catered to CEOs, athletes, oil magnates. I met people whose names the world whispered, people who shook hands in boardrooms that decided nations. I never named names. It wasn't part of the job. The funny part? My family still thought I worked at the airport. Once, Mallory asked during a Christmas brunch, "So do you like scan tickets or check luggage?" I just smiled and said, "Something like that." She moved on before I could explain, not that I would have. Explaining meant opening a door I'd spent years learning to keep closed. My parents didn't ask. They were busy bragging about Mallory's latest home renovation and how Liam got into a competitive STEM summer camp. When I mentioned I'd be flying out of Nice the following week, they blinked. "Nice?" my dad said. "Is that in Nevada?" I nodded. "Sure, Dad. Nevada." They didn't care enough to notice the difference, and honestly, I preferred it that way. Because the truth is, when people underestimate you long enough, they stop noticing when you rise. And when you rise silently, without needing their applause, it unsettles them more than any spotlight ever could. I kept it that way on purpose. The uniform stayed folded in my travel bag. My headset tucked into a custom leather case. No framed certificates, no glossy pictures on the mantle. I never posted about it. No one from my family followed the charter company online, so there was no risk of them stumbling on a press release or photo op. I was invisible by design. But sometimes I wondered, not for their approval, that ship had sailed long ago, but I wondered what it said about a family that could sit across from you for years and never once ask, "What do you love? What are you proud of? What do you do when no one's watching?" I wasn't hiding. I just wasn't volunteering. And maybe that was my quiet revenge. While they traded stories over Chardonnay and small talk, I was watching the sun rise over the Atlantic from a cockpit window, charting paths through turbulence and tailwinds, guiding strangers safely through sky and storm. And all the while, no one at that table knew. Not until the one person they didn't train to look down on finally spoke. The invitation came in a group text. Mallory sent it at 6:02 a.m. on a Wednesday, family barbecue at our place next Saturday. Bring whatever. Let's catch up. It's been too long. I stared at the message for a full minute. It was her usual tone, breezy, performative, pretending to include while still reminding everyone who was in charge. She always picked the venue, controlled the guest list, decided the narrative before the event began. I usually ignored her invites. I'd come up with work excuses, and technically, they were true. Being on call for charter flights meant I could disappear across oceans in an hour's notice. But this time something told me to say yes. I typed, "I'll be there," before I could overthink it, and immediately regretted pressing send. Not because I didn't mean it, but because I knew exactly what she'd do with it. That week she messaged again, "Bring your famous fruit salad. People still talk about it, LOL." I hadn't made a fruit salad in years, and no one ever talked about it, but I said, "Sure." Then came the photo of her backyard setup, string lights, curated outdoor cushions, Liam's new soccer goal positioned like decor. Mallory was already staging the event like an Instagram shoot. Saturday arrived hot and cloudless. I wore a simple white linen shirt, slacks, and flats. Hair tied back, no makeup, no jewelry. I parked 2 blocks away out of habit. Even now, I never liked the idea of showing up with anything they could judge. Her backyard was already full: neighbors, cousins, old family friends. Mallory had a Bluetooth speaker playing some top 40 playlist, and she floated between conversations like she was running for office. She spotted me halfway through pouring a glass of rose. "Well, look who decided to show up," she sang, "and right on time to help with the corn. You always were the quiet, reliable one." I smiled. "Nice to see you too, Mallory." She handed me tongs like it was a game, like she still had the power to cast me into the role she needed me to play: the helper, the harmless background. I took them because I wasn't here to argue. I was here to observe. The usual dance played out, Mallory telling stories at full volume, always the protagonist. Our parents beaming whenever she mentioned her son's school scores or her husband's real estate wins. When I chimed in with a nice weather, no one replied. At one point she introduced me to a neighbor with a laugh. "This is my sister Sierra, she works something with planes, right?" I nodded. "Something like that." The woman smiled politely and moved on. Mallory turned back to the grill smirking, as if she just successfully filed me under irrelevant again. I let her. Let her think I'd come here to fade like always, let her narrate the afternoon however she wanted, because I knew something she didn't. Liam, her 10-year-old son, had spent last Thanksgiving weekend with me when Mallory and her husband went on a cruise. I'd taken him to the hangar, let him sit in the cockpit, let him wear my spare headset. I'd shown him what I did, not for credit, but because he asked. He had looked at me wide-eyed and whispered, "You fly this?" And I had said, "Every week." He hadn't forgotten. The sun had started to dip behind the fence, casting long amber lines across the patio. People had settled into the second round of drinks, the kind that made their laughter louder and their judgment looser. That was always Mallory's favorite time, when she could turn the spotlight into a weapon and call it just teasing. She sat on the wicker bench near the fire pit, glass of wine in hand, surrounded by an eager semicircle. I saw it coming, the moment she leaned forward with that grin she always wore when she was about to offer a story everyone else was too polite to challenge. "You guys remember when Sierra got lost in the grocery store for like an hour?" she said, looking straight at our aunt. "She cried so hard the store manager had to give her a free lollipop just to calm her down. And she was what, 8? I didn't answer. I didn't even flinch. Someone laughed, my uncle, I think. Another chimed in, "Sierra, really? I can't picture that." Mallory continued, animated now. She was always so dramatic about the smallest things. "I mean, even in school, remember the time she refused to present her science fair project and just stood there frozen? That was peak Sierra." I stared at my half-full glass of water, still clear. My name was being passed around like a party trick, and everyone was too used to the taste to question it. Except one. Liam was sitting cross-legged on the edge of the lawn, holding a half-eaten popsicle and watching his mother closely. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't smiling. His small eyebrows were drawn in just enough for me to notice. Then he stood up. "Mom," he said, not loudly, but clear enough. Mallory paused mid-sentence. "What, sweetie?" He walked over and looked at her, puzzled. "Why are you making fun of Aunt Sierra?" Mallory blinked, thrown. "I'm not, baby. We're just telling funny stories. It's all in good fun." But he turned toward me, then looked back at her. "She flies the jet." Silence. Real silence. The kind that presses against the skin. Glasses paused mid-sip. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed and didn't finish the sound. Mallory's smile faltered. "She what?" a cousin asked, half laughing, like he wasn't sure if this was part of the act. Liam nodded. "She took me to her airport. She let me sit in the seat with all the controls. She said she flies people around the world. She's a pilot. Mallory opened her mouth. Closed it. My father's head turned sharply. My mother's brows furrowed like she'd heard something in a language she'd long forgotten. I didn't move. I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I just let it land. Let it hover. Let it settle on their shoulders like a truth too heavy to laugh off. No one knew what to say. It was the kind of silence that didn't just fall over a room, it stayed. Thick, awkward, clinging to the air like smoke after something burns. I'd seen that look before in cockpits, when a system failed midair and the crew had 3 seconds to process it. But here, the only system that had failed was their narrative of who I was. Mallory still hadn't blinked. She stared at Liam like he'd betrayed her. Her carefully curated image, the fun, witty older sister with the pitiful invisible sibling, had cracked in front of her own son. And worse, she didn't see it coming. My mother slowly set down her drink, clearing her throat like she might reclaim control of the moment. "Seer, honey, I didn't know you were flying those kinds of planes." I smiled gently. "You never asked what kind of planes." My father gave a dry little laugh, trying to lighten the mood. "Guess you've been full of surprises." "No," I said simply. "You've just been full of assumptions." There was nothing cruel in my tone, just the kind of stillness that comes from years of being overlooked and misunderstood, until you learn that correction isn't owed. It's optional. Aunt Valerie chimed in, nervously cheerful. "Well, I think it's wonderful. I mean, not many people do what you do, right?" Everyone in the room mumbled something like agreement, though no one met my eyes. Because to do that would mean acknowledging how long they'd been looking past me. And I wasn't interested in forced compliments. Not tonight. Liam came over and stood beside me again, like he knew I needed something steady to hold on to, even if I didn't reach for it. He was quiet now, but his presence was loud in the way only honesty can be. I caught Mallory's gaze. For the first time in my life, she looked smaller than me, not physically, but something in her eyes had shrunk. There was confusion there. And beneath it, something close to fear. Embarrassment. Maybe just the shock of seeing a version of me she hadn't written the script for. Her voice was small. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I tilted my head, considered answering for real. Then I settled for the truth. "Because you never made space to listen." The words hung there. No one tried to dismiss them. Not even her. I stood, brushing invisible wrinkles from my shirt. Liam looked up, hopeful. "Are you leaving?" he asked. "I think I've been here long enough." His shoulders drooped a little. "Will you come back?" I crouched slightly, so only he could hear me. "That depends. You still want to learn what all the switches do?" His face lit up. "Yeah. Then maybe," I said. "One day." I ruffled his hair and turned toward the gate. I didn't need to storm out or make a statement. The silence behind me said everything. This time, it didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like consequence. And no one stopped me. They just watched, like passengers who just realized someone else had been flying the plane all along. The morning after the barbecue, I was 37,000 feet above the Atlantic, wrapped in a silence I had chosen. Up here, there were no questions like, "What do you do again?" No dismissive laughter. No rewrites of my life served as punchlines. Just sky, light turbulence, and trust. Trust from people who handed me their lives without knowing my name. I sat in the cockpit, hands steady, voice clear, focused. That's where I belong. Not at folding chairs in someone else's backyard. Not in conversations that mistake silence for emptiness. I thought about Mallory. About the way her face cracked just slightly when her son said what she never could, "She flies the jet." Not she used to. Not she wants to. She does. Present tense. Unavoidable. Real. I don't think she'll bring it up. I don't expect an apology. But I know she heard it. I know they all did. And for once, they didn't have a comeback. Why didn't you ever say anything? And I told her the truth. Because you never asked. Not out of spite. Not to wound her. But because it had been true for years. They built a version of me that was small, quiet, convenient. And I let them. Because I didn't need their permission to grow beyond it. But Liam asked. He looked. He saw. And in one moment, he reminded them of everything they had missed while they were too busy talking over me. That's what stayed with me the most. Not the silence after. Not the awkward glances. The look in his eyes when he said it. Sure. Proud. Unbothered. He didn't say it to defend me. He said it because it was normal to him. Because to a child raised with truth, power doesn't need to be loud to be real. That's what I carried with me into the clouds. I don't need my family to clap. I don't need them to understand. I just need what I've always had, runway, altitude, and the calm that comes from knowing exactly who I am. And up here, the sky doesn't ask me where I've been. It simply clears the air and lets me fly.